The news anchors looked grim, their voices hushed as they reported on the latest global economic figures. It wasn't a war with tanks and bombs, but the impact felt just as devastating. Factories across the nation were laying off thousands, supply chains were seizing up, and the price of everyday goods was climbing faster than anyone could remember. People were worried, really worried, and that fear was a thick cloud hanging over everything. This wasn't some distant problem. It was happening right here, right now, changing lives in real time. The usual chatter about military might and defense spending seemed to shrink in comparison to the immediate grinding reality of empty grocery shelves and lost jobs. It was a strange kind of quiet panic, a feeling that something fundamental was shifting underneath everyone's feet, something far more insidious than any traditional threat. Then, on a late-night talk show, a well-known geopolitical analyst, Dr. Evelyn Reed, leaned into the camera, her expression serious. Her words cut through the usual noise. America's real vulnerability isn't external military force, it's internal economic decay, she stated plainly. The way she said it without any drama made it hit harder. It wasn't a warning about an invading army, but about something eating away from the inside. As I listened, a thought clicked into place, a pattern I'd seen echo through history books. It wasn't just about the current crisis, this was a recurring theme. Empires didn't always fall to barbarian hordes at their gates. Often they crumbled from within, their foundations weakened by bad harvests, corrupt leaders, or simply a broken economy. Dr. Reed wasn't just talking about today. She was tapping into something much older, a truth that many powerful nations had learned the hard way. It wasn't about being scared, it was about seeing a clear, albeit uncomfortable, historical truth playing out again. It was a cold, hard fact, not some emotional outburst. It brought to mind a phrase that had always resonated with me. The very strength meant to deter becomes the weakness that invites collapse. Think about it. A nation builds a massive military, pouring endless resources into it, believing it's the ultimate shield. But if that spending drains the economy, leaving its people poor and its infrastructure crumbling, what good is the shield? It becomes a hollow shell, impressive on the outside, but fragile within. The money spent on maintaining that image of strength could have gone into schools, hospitals, or new industries, things that build true, lasting resilience. Instead, it creates a top-heavy structure ready to topple. This whole situation leaves a lingering question, one that keeps me up at night. What is the true nature of national security in an era where financial markets can crash economies faster than any missile? Is it about tanks and fighter jets, or about stable currencies, thriving businesses, and a healthy job market? It feels like the battleground has shifted, and we might not even realize we're fighting a different war. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The idea that economic power is the real muscle behind national defense isn't new. It's a story as old as civilization itself. If we look back, way back, we see empires rise and fall, not just by the strength of their armies, but by the robustness of their economies. Take the Romans, for instance. Their legions were formidable, yes, but what truly underpinned their might was their incredible infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, organized trade routes. These weren't just for convenience. They were the veins and arteries of a powerful economic system. They allowed for efficient movement of goods, taxes, and, critically, soldiers. A strong economy meant consistent tax revenue, which in turn funded those legions, built those roads, and fed the population. When their economic engine started to sputter, when inflation hit or trade routes became insecure, their military dominance began to waver no matter how many brave soldiers they had. Later, the British Empire showed us this on a global scale. Their navy was unmatched, ruling the waves, but it wasn't just about bigger ships or better cannons, it was about trade. The British East India Company, for example, wasn't just a trading entity, it was an extension of British power, securing resources and markets. Their naval dominance protected those trade routes, ensuring a continuous flow of goods and wealth back to the homeland. This wealth then funded more ships, more soldiers, and more expansion. The currency was stable, trusted, and backed by a vast economic network. Their military and economic power were two sides of the same coin, each feeding the other. It was a simple, brutal formula: control the money, control the world. But history also teaches us that even the mightiest economies can be brought low by internal missteps. Take the Spanish Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries. They discovered unimaginable amounts of silver in the New World, and it poured into Spain. You'd think this would make them unstoppable, right? Instead, it led to massive inflation. Prices skyrocketed, local industries couldn't compete, and the wealth, instead of being invested productively, often went into funding wars and lavish lifestyles. This economic mismanagement, despite all the silver, weakened their foundation, making them vulnerable. Their military, though still powerful, was increasingly expensive to maintain, and the well of resources that seemed endless eventually dried up, not because it was gone, but because its value had been destroyed by short-sighted policy. Similarly, France faced severe financial woes leading up to events like the French Revolution. Decades of expensive wars, royal extravagance, and an inefficient tax system left the country drowning in debt. This wasn't a sudden crisis. It was an accumulation of bad economic decisions over generations. The inability to fund its government, its military, and its people directly led to internal unrest and external weakness. These weren't dramatic military defeats. They were slow, grinding economic collapses that eventually made the nation ripe for change, or even conquest, whether military or ideological. In more recent times, we've seen subtle shifts that, over decades, have eroded the financial self-sufficiency of nations. The move from economies focused on producing goods to ones dominated by finance, or the outsourcing of critical industries to other countries, these aren't immediate threats, but they chip away at a nation's resilience. When a country can no longer produce its own essential goods, or its financial system becomes overly complex and detached from real production, it creates dependencies. These dependencies might seem harmless during peacetime, but in a crisis, they become glaring vulnerabilities. It's like slowly replacing the solid timber beams of a house with decorative, but ultimately weaker materials. The house still stands, but its ability to weather a storm is severely compromised. These aren't just economic choices. They are national security decisions in disguise. The real turning point, though, for how nations secured themselves and projected power really solidified after World War II. That's when the Bretton Woods system was set up. It pegged global currencies to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was tied to gold. For a time, this brought stability, and the US, having emerged from the war relatively unscathed and with a massive industrial base, became the economic anchor of the free world. Its currency was trusted, its economy was robust, and its influence was undeniable. This system essentially made America the financial superpower, and its economic health became intertwined with global prosperity. But then, in the early 1970s, something monumental happened. The dollar was decoupled from gold. This move, while necessary at the time for various reasons, fundamentally changed the game. Suddenly, the US dollar, without the physical backing of gold, became a fiat currency whose value was maintained by the global trust in the American economy and its government. This gave the US an incredible, almost unprecedented advantage. It could essentially print the world's reserve currency. This ability became a new form of invasion deterrence-wise. Why? Because every major global transaction, from oil sales to international trade, was settled in dollars. This meant the world needed dollars, and to get them they had to engage with the American financial system. This monetary system, while initially bolstering America's global position and giving it immense leverage, also inadvertently planted the seeds for future vulnerabilities. The power to print reserve currency meant that the US could run significant trade deficits without immediate severe consequences that other nations would face. It allowed for a level of economic expansion and consumption that might not have been sustainable otherwise. This created a global dependency on the dollar, but also paradoxically made the US vulnerable to shifts in global trust. If that trust ever faltered, or if other nations decided to move away from the dollar, the entire system could face a systemic shock. It's like building a house on a foundation of trust. As long as everyone trusts it, it stands firm, but remove that trust, and the whole structure is at risk. We're seeing the early signs of this today. The talk of de-dollarization, The rise of alternative payment systems and the increasing economic interdependence of nations mean that America's economic dominance, while still significant, is no longer absolute. The old forms of military invasion might seem archaic when economic warfare can be so devastating. A nation doesn't need to send tanks across a border if it can cripple another country's economy through sanctions, cyber attacks on financial infrastructure, or by simply shifting away from its currency. The fall of a system might not be a dramatic collapse, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of influence, a gradual shift in the global financial order. The outcome for ordinary citizens in such a scenario isn't a dramatic battle on a field, but a slow, grinding decline in living standards, rising prices, and a loss of economic opportunity. It's a victory for a new global financial order, not necessarily a military one. The invincibility of a nation, especially one as globally integrated as the US, is no longer purely about its military might. It's inextricably linked to its economic resilience, the stability of its financial systems, and the continued trust the world places in its currency and its institutions. In an interconnected world, the battle for sovereignty is fought not on the battlefield, but in the balance sheets of nations.